Orders matter. Emergency plans matter. Knowing where to go and how to communicate with loved ones can mean the difference between life and death when disaster strikes. If you value real stories of survival, resilience, and the forces that shape our world, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. And in our next episode, we'll examine another disaster that changed America forever, revealing how a single day altered thousands of lives in ways no one expected. Today, nearly 2 decades later, New Orleans stands rebuilt. Streets that once lay underwater are filled with life again. Music echoes through neighborhoods that refuse to disappear. Yet beneath the recovery remains a memory that cannot be erased. Hurricane Katrina was more than a storm. It was a test of infrastructure, leadership, preparation, and human endurance. It revealed both the immense power of nature and the consequences of failure. Most importantly, it revealed the strength of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Because when the floodwaters finally receded, what remained was not just the story of what was lost. It was the story of those who survived, those who helped, and those who ensured that the lessons of Katrina would never be forgotten. Flood protection system contributed significantly to the disaster. Experts determined that the hurricane alone did not cause all the destruction. The failure of key flood defenses turned a dangerous storm into a historic catastrophe. The economic damage was staggering. Katrina caused more than $125 billion in losses in 2005. Adjusted for inflation, the total exceeds $160 billion today. Entire industries were disrupted. Oil and gas operations suffered major setbacks. Infrastructure across the Gulf Coast required years of rebuilding. Yet amid the devastation, stories of courage emerged. One Coast Guard rescue swimmer participated in dozens of rooftop rescues. He later described seeing people who had lost everything still helping neighbors climb to safety. In the middle of unimaginable hardship, acts of kindness appeared everywhere. A New Orleans nurse remained with critically ill patients even after floodwaters surrounded the hospital. She refused to leave until every patient had been evacuated. Her story became one of many examples of extraordinary dedication during the crisis. Another survivor spent days trapped on a roof with relatives. When rescue finally arrived, he watched first responders risk their lives to save complete strangers. Years later, he still described that moment as proof that hope can survive even the darkest disasters. Public outrage over Katrina led to major reforms. Emergency management procedures were reevaluated. Federal disaster response systems underwent significant changes. Billions of dollars were invested in strengthening flood protection around New Orleans. New levees, surge barriers, and pumping systems were constructed to reduce the risk of another catastrophe. But experts continue to warn that no system is perfect. Rising sea levels and stronger storms present ongoing challenges. Katrina remains a reminder that preparedness cannot be taken for granted. If there is one lesson from Katrina, it is this: evacuation. Tens of thousands sought refuge at the Louisiana Superdome and the Convention Center. Conditions rapidly deteriorated. Supplies ran low. Temperatures climbed. Frustration and fear spread through the crowded shelters. One paramedic described the city as a maze of water, debris, and desperation. Rescue crews worked around the clock. Boats navigated flooded streets, searching for survivors. Helicopter crews pulled stranded residents from rooftops one after another. Some rescuers barely slept for days. Meanwhile, along the Mississippi Gulf Coast, entire communities suffered catastrophic damage. Homes were flattened. Casinos mounted on barges were hurled inland. Buildings that had stood for generations disappeared. The storm surge acted like a moving wall of destruction, sweeping away nearly everything in its path. As the days passed, another crisis emerged. Thousands remained stranded without food, clean water, or medical care. Hospitals struggled to function. Backup generators failed. Doctors and nurses faced impossible choices. Some patients had to be evacuated under extreme conditions. The human toll continued to climb. Official investigations would later determine that approximately 1,392 people lost their lives. Many drowned in floodwaters. Others died because medical care became inaccessible. The victims included children, elderly residents, and entire families who had nowhere to go. The disaster also displaced hundreds of thousands of people. Some never returned home. Neighborhoods that had once been full of life became silent. Schools closed. Businesses vanished. Communities were scattered across the country. The emotional scars would last for years. As floodwaters slowly receded, investigators began asking difficult questions. Why had the levees failed? Why had the response been so slow? Why had so many vulnerable residents been left behind? The answers were troubling. Multiple investigations concluded that design flaws and weaknesses in portions of the first signs of catastrophe appeared before sunrise. Water started overtopping sections of the levee system designed to protect the city. These walls and barriers had been built over decades. Residents trusted them. They were supposed to hold back the water. They did not. Around 5 a.m., flood walls along the industrial canal began to fail. Water rushed into nearby neighborhoods. Soon, additional breaches appeared. By morning, multiple sections of the flood protection system had collapsed. More than 50 failures would eventually be reported. The city was losing its battle against the water. Residents in the lower Ninth Ward heard an unforgettable sound. Some described it as a freight train. Others said it sounded like an explosion. A massive surge of water burst through the breached flood walls and swept into homes. Streets transformed into rivers within minutes. Cars floated away. Buildings were ripped from foundations. One survivor later recalled waking up to water rushing through the front door. Within minutes, it was chest deep. The family climbed into the attic. Then the water kept rising. They had no choice but to cut through the roof and escape onto the shingles. Thousands faced similar decisions that day. By midday, large sections of New Orleans were underwater. Emergency calls flooded dispatch centers. Many first responders were victims themselves. Police stations, fire stations, and emergency facilities were cut off by floodwaters. Communication systems failed. Roads disappeared beneath the rising water. As helicopters flew overhead, scenes unfolded that seemed impossible in the United States. Families waved from rooftops. Elderly residents sat trapped in wheelchairs surrounded by floodwater. Children waited for rescue under the blazing summer sun. Every hour brought new emergencies. By August 30th, roughly 80% of New Orleans was flooded. In some neighborhoods, water reached depths of 20 feet. The water was rising. Fast. Families climbed into attics. Elderly residents waited on rooftops. Parents held children above their heads as an American city slowly disappeared beneath a flood that was never supposed to happen. In just a few hours, thousands of lives would be thrown into chaos. More than 1,000 people would never come home. And what began as a hurricane would become one of the greatest disasters in American history. It was early morning on August 29, 2005. Hurricane Katrina was approaching the Gulf Coast after tearing through the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Just days earlier, it had strengthened into a terrifying Category 5 storm with winds reaching 175 miles per hour. Although it weakened before landfall, the danger had not passed. The storm was carrying something far deadlier than wind. It was carrying water. At approximately 6:10 a.m., Katrina made landfall near Boris, Louisiana, as a Category 3 hurricane. Sustained winds exceeded 125 miles per hour. The storm stretched for hundreds of miles. Along the Mississippi coast, a massive storm surge pushed inland. In some locations, the wall of water reached nearly 28 feet above normal tide levels. Entire neighborhoods were about to vanish beneath it. Many residents had evacuated. More than 1 million people fled the Gulf Coast before the storm arrived. But tens of thousands remained. Some lacked transportation. Others believed they had survived hurricanes before and would survive this one too. Many had no idea that the greatest threat was not the hurricane itself. As dawn broke over New Orleans, fierce winds rattled buildings and tore apart power lines. Rain lashed the city. Trees snapped. Windows shattered. Yet some officials initially believed New Orleans had escaped the worst. Katrina's eye had passed east of the city. It seemed the nightmare might be over. In reality, it was only beginning.